In all my years of watching movies, I haven't had anything really speak to me in a way that made me feel like I was the protagonist in the movie. I mean, I watched a lot of movies that aren't something really real or anything like that. Scott Pilgrim vs. the World changed that in less than 5 minutes, and I haven't felt this way about a movie since the SpongeBob SquarePants movie. Based on the graphic novels by Brian Lee O'Malley and produced by Edgar Wright, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World is about a guy named Scott Pilgrim falling in love with a woman named Ramona Flowers. But before he can date her, he must defeat her 7 evil exes, each more intimidating and harder than the last. As an adaptation of the books, which I have read, it's almost one-to-one with just a few scenes being cut out of the movie to make sure that it isn't overly long. One of the reasons why this movie feels one-to-one is that cast list right there. The casting feels basically perfect for this movie. I mean, look at Michael Cera in the movie, and then look at Scott in the comics. Look at Kieran Culkin in the movie, and then look at Wallace in the comics. Look at Ellen Wong in the movie, and then look at Knives in the comics. You get my point. Every single person cast feels familiar to the character traits they had in the comics, but they still feel fresh, reimagined, remastered. You know, the adjective the game should have. Michael Cera's acting as Scott feels perfect. He feels relatable to the viewer with how he acts and the things he does together. But unlike the comic, Scott here feels like he doesn't have much room to grow as a person. In the comics, after Ramona left him, he just didn't face Gideon for a long stretch of time, not really wanting to face him in the slightest. But in the movie, Scott doesn't have Ramona leave him in the same way. If anything, Ramona kinda overreacts to him asking for a list to know who's next. And after this, he still feels qualified to go get Ramona back. He has this confidence that doesn't make him the lovable goofball that makes mistakes sometimes, but it makes him a smoother Scott. It's if he shaved his beard. What's there anyway? Scott in the movie is still a good guy though, and I like the jokes they wrote for him.
What are you doing? Getting a life.
Ramona, played by Mary Elizabeth Winstead, is cast pretty well in my opinion. Winstead basically personifies the personality of Ramona from the comics. She's quick, she's snappy, and she's like that one LGBTQ girl in your class that doesn't really talk to you but is still your friend somehow. If you're that person, you know who you are. Hi. I like the way they wrote Ramona as someone with a foil to Scott. You could argue that basically every character is a foil to Scott, but Ramona is better at being a foil to Scott than say Stacy or Wallace, with how she calls out his antics and makes fun of him, especially in the comics. In the movie, however, she's kind of the same, but with a lot more sass and more jokes, although she does have the occasional one-liner that I'm not a big fan of.
Let's get his pretentious ass up here, because I'm about to kick yours out of the Great White North.
But here's the thing, Ramona doesn't feel fully realized. When I was watching the movie for the first time, I found no problems with her, but after reading the comics, during writing, I have a few issues I'd like to say. Ramona in the comics was a really flawed character. She could do some terrible stuff, and she flat out left Gideon, not even telling him why she left, just leaving a note to give later, emphasis on later. In the movie, that's never addressed, and Gideon's just written off as the 7th ex Scott has to beat, while in the book he's this all-powerful entity inside of Ramona's head. If anything, Ramona feels perfect as a character in the movie with no flaws whatsoever, which I'm not cool with. This gives her little room to grow other than just accepting Scott as her boyfriend. She feels rigid and stiff, like there's rust on her joints, and the movie can't or won't give Ramona the oil to make her move freely again. And it's not just Ramona that has this problem. Kim, Steven, and even Scott have this problem where they can't become more than just their comic counterparts. Take Knives for example. In the comics, she evolves from a fangirl without much of a personality who just loves Scott to this fully grown adult who thinks for herself and doesn't have a lot of love to give to Scott after he basically cheated on her. Scott in the movie just comes clean with the cheating thing, which doesn't let Knives become a better person in the comics. You know, the arguably better one. In terms of the exes, Gideon is my personal favorite, with his personality basically being, I secretly hate you, get out of my life. And he gives up the impression that he doesn't really care about Scott, his friends, or Ramona, especially in the comics. And plus he's actually really funny with how he acts and all that. And his fight scene is one of the best choreographed in the entirety of the movie, with all of the effects using the moves that Gideon, Scott, and eventually Knives use against each other. Speaking of those fight scenes, they're all amazing and pretty well choreographed. Well, not as well as Gideon's fight, but they still work well. Patel's fight is the most basic, and it makes sense for the level of difficulty it is. He's the Osana of the group, if you will, if Yandere Simulator got finished. His fight isn't overly complicated like the other Evil X's, but it gives Scott a bit of a challenge and shows off the power of the league, if in a small way. Lucas Lee is a bit of a step up, but instead of mostly fists, Scott outsmarts him, and to me, this is one of the better fights of Evil X's because of that alone. Scott knows he can't beat Lucas up, so he just uses his brain instead. In fact, that same strategy is applied to Todd, the third Evil X that's a telepathic vegan, because logic isn't a thing in this universe.
I played the story this cup. I thought really hard about the right cup. You know, in my mind's eye or whatever.
What are you talking about?
You just drank half and half, baby.
Everyone watching this video should be extremely afraid of vegans after this movie, because look at that hair, god damn. If you really think about it, every single Evil X fight is just Patel plus blank. Lucas is Patel plus buff movie star, Todd is Patel plus vegan telepathy, so on and so forth. The people behind this knew it would get a tad boring just to watch Scott beat guys up, so they made these fights really interesting with different strategies and moves used by both Scott and Ramona. I'm actually really a big fan of these fights, and they make the movie feel a whole lot more interesting to watch. One of the things that made me squeal most of the time were the video game references that are sprinkled in. Emphasis on sprinkled, because when the references were in there, I barely even noticed them.
Hi.
When I say references to video games, I mean other games, because this movie has a lot of references to genres of games, what with the fighting game UI present in each 5 of the X's. They're cool, these references, but the filmmakers obviously knew that making the movie filled to the brim with video game references would bring down the overall quality of the movie, and I'm thankful that they didn't do as many video game references as other movies like Scott Pilgrim. Because believe me, I know that other producers would have stuffed this thing full of references and it would have been boring as all hell to watch. The pacing of Scott Pilgrim in comparison to the comic is actually pretty good. Nothing feels too slow, but jokes come on at the right time. It feels balanced. Every single minute fighting the X's doesn't go on for too long. It feels good to watch, like that's the exact amount of time needed to create such a scene. To be honest though, some scenes feel extremely uncomfortable to be watching, and they feel like they go on for way too long. It's a 90-10 split, and thankfully the good stuff is on the 90 part of a split. Most of the scenes are worth watching through completely, especially if you can spot the Easter eggs, like this X which represents an X-Men reference, or the riff that Scott plays on his guitar which is a reference to Final Fantasy. It's really cool. Okay, let's talk about the jokes. I already touched on how I like the getting a life joke, but some of the quotes from the movie are pretty funny, especially the ones from Kim, especially how sarcastic she is.
Great story, man.
But some of the other jokes like the "you didn't bang her" joke and the "what's the link for Amazon.ca" joke aren't very funny to me. I know those are in the comics, they didn't make me laugh either. I thought they were lazy and uninspired and they didn't make me go haha. The garlic bread scene is sacred, however, and if you say otherwise, I will escort your ass out of the Grapevine North.
Bread makes you fat?
Scott Pilgrim vs. the World is a good adaptation of the comics, and to be honest, it's one of the better adaptations I've watched in recent memory. Well, then again, the last adaptation I watched was Percy Jackson and the Olympian, so my standards were kind of low. But with funny characters who don't have much room to grow, interesting locations, amazing casting, good jokes, and the references, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World cements itself as something you need to watch. Fun fact before the video ends, did you know it actually took about 20 takes just to get this one scene of Scott throwing his CD order from Amazon.ca into the bin? That's kind of funny to me.